And then I'm going to later ask Denise's husband to perform the magic of making it available for you. Because much as
That'll
I
be
try,
fine.
good, bless Mark. Okay, Hadassah moment. A decade ago, Leah tried to commit suicide after experiencing horrendous abuse. Last year, she was happily married and soon became pregnant. Nevertheless, she worried that the nightmares of the past would impact her experience giving birth. For help, she turned to the Corrective Birth Experience Clinic at Hadassah Hospital, Mount Scopus. It was specially designed to help women like Liat who had experienced traumatic personal suffering or difficult births. Medical team members have to know ahead of time what they should or shouldn't do or say. Part of the plan is a pre-birth tour of the new Rady Mother and Child Center at Mount Scopus, so expectant mothers become familiar with the setting, including the delivery room. The team was with me the entire time, says Liat. Excuse me as I admit somebody. When I got to the delivery room, they knew about my situation and were fully prepared. I realized I could trust them. I can't put into words how significant this was for me and for my family. And Hadassah continues to do things like that all of the time. So God bless all of you for helping with that. Linda Brown,
Yes,
you're on.
here I am. Oh, you want me to talk now?
Yes,
Just sit there, look
That
pretty.
could be a
we
problem.
can.
No. Anybody happen to watch the Today program this morning with Savannah Guthrie? Anybody? Oh, good. Let me tell you what happened because it has a direct relationship to our Mahjong game. It seems that the CDC has now announced that if you have been 2 weeks after your second vaccination, that you and your friends could gather as long as all of them have had their second vaccination 2 weeks out. And you could gather in people's homes and you can remove your mask and you can hug them and you can you don't have to social distance and like you could play games. So with that, Savannah Guthrie then said to the doctor, she said, oh, so my mother in Florida who plays mahjong with three other gals can now resume playing and they don't have to wear their masks. And she said, that's right. um she can continue playing mahjong. And I thought, yes, they gave me a plug. I wanted to call up there and say, now sign up for our tournament. With that in mind, let me give you a little hope. Some of you have been questioning me and asking about the mahjong tournament. Let me explain to you that not only is it simple, but I'm looking at it as our last hurrah. This will be your last tournament or play with the old card because it's starting on April 4th. And by then or that week, those of you that play will be getting the new card. So I'm thinking of it as sort of as a going away party and a way to raise a lot of money for Hadassah. Please, if you've never been in a tournament, don't let it stop you. It's a lot of fun and you get to meet a lot of people. I have people signed up from Texas, from Ohio, from Florida, from New Jersey, from here in Pennsylvania. And I know that the big question that many of you have had is, can I play with my friends? Well, you can play with your friends any day of the week, but in a tournament, it's really only fair if you broaden your horizons and meet some new mahjong mavens. Believe it or not, during a tournament, people are really very nice. And in my opinion, it is a perfect way to get into a tournament that you may never had wanted to do in person, because in person it's a little bit nerve wracking, and people who go to tournaments like me go often, and you sort of feel, oh my god, I've never been in one, how am I going to keep up, and blah 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 blah. The online tournament is just so much easier because it's all done with the app, And anybody who's been on the Real Mahjong app and plays with their friends will be absolutely fine. One other question that people have had, so let me take a brief moment, Eileen, if it's okay, is to explain how it works. I will divide up all the people that send their check in. Many of you have questions about it, and I sent you the information. Hopefully, now you will get your check in so I can put you in the official roster. I will divide up the roster into tables of four. And those four people, 1 week before, actually the night before Passover, Passover starts on a Saturday. I'll be doing this on Friday morning. You will get the name, the email address, and the cell phone number of three people who you probably will not know. And you will email those people, and they will email you to work out your schedule. The entire tournament is a 16 game tournament that can be played at your rate anytime over the 3 days. So let me break it down for you. Easter Sunday is day one, Monday is day two, Tuesday is day three. Let's say that somebody in your group is busy all day Sunday and doesn't want to play at all. Fine, you can find 2 hours on Monday and 2 hours on Tuesday. Or maybe they say, well, I'll be home by 7 o'clock on Sunday night. Do you want to play 1 hour Sunday night? And then we'll only have the other 3 hours to play over Monday and Tuesday. When I was in a tournament like this in Cincinnati, which I'm doing again this weekend, it worked out very nicely. We chose Sunday from 12 to 4, and trust me, it did not take that long. You're supposed to play 4 games in an hour, but in reality, because they do all the shuffling for you, it really takes about 35 minutes tops to play the 4 games. So we decided we would play from 12 to 4. We took a half an hour break and we were done with our 16 games by 3:35. So, people who are going, oh my God, 4 hours. I don't know if I can sit for 4 hours. You don't have to. You can sit for 2 hours. You can take an hour break. You can go back and do the other two. And I'll tell you, the other three gals who I didn't know at all were really very good about, looking at everyone's schedule and saying, okay, let's work it out this way, or I can't do anything on Monday till Monday, whatever it happens to be. And there'll be a score sheet that you can keep score. It's basically very simple. It's not the way they score online, um, but the rules are sent out to everybody so that you see the scoring. About the only, I wouldn't say difficult, but the only new thing in a tournament that people may not be used to is if you throw mahjong to someone with 2 exposures. Let's say that someone's doing a hand and they've already called 2 exposures. If you throw the tile that gets them mahjong and they had 2 exposures, you're going to lose 10 points. But you know what? It's the fun of the whole thing. And we're trying to make money for Hadassah. And you know as well as I do how hard this past year has been. So I'm asking everybody. I teach a bunch of students in Philadelphia. They wanted to participate, but they're just learning the game. Do you know that they sent in a donation to Hadassah in my name because they were, they wanted to support Hadassah so much. So please, and if you've got friends that you play with, have them sign up also. It really is. It's a fun, great fundraiser. And let me tell you, I've added one thing in addition to the 3 top prizes, and we're giving out like $200 and $300 worth of prizes. They're Amazon gift cards, but they are money. What I'm also doing is giving out a $10 gift card to the high score of every table of four. So, for example, you and the 3 gals that you're in are in your own little competition because if you come out with the highest score, you're going to get a $10 Amazon card sort of for your participation. So please spread the word. And if you're planning on doing it, and I've spoken with you or I've sent you the information, please get your checks in, only because I've got to start putting the tables together. Questions?
Well,
Okay.
thank you very much.
Help us raise lots of money, and it could be the last hurrah on this card, which I'm really sick of.
I've never liked this
And
card.
when you're all done with the tournament, then we can get a brand new card.
Here, here. Thank you very much, Linda. What Linda isn't saying is that the people who sent her the certificate did it as I'm sure they love Hadassah, but as a huge thank you to Linda for the job she's done in teaching them Mahjong. So thank you, Linda.
Thank you, thank you.
I also would like everyone to mute themselves right now. So go mute. And then if you have a question for Joy, you can unmute yourself. I also want to point out that I know on my MacBook at the top, it says view. I don't know where that is on yours, but speaker view would be good when Joy starts speaking. So you get to see all of Joy and not all our other little faces. Joy, Andy's joining us today for you. So hi, Andy. Good to see you.
I'll unmute for a second. Hi, guys. Nice to see everybody, and everybody be well. And Joy, especially good to see you.
You too.
You. Thanks, Eileen. Hi.
Absolutely. So, Margie, are you going to introduce Joy?
Ready? Yep.
And thank you, Joy, so much for being here. It's appreciated. All right, I'm changing
Oh,
speaker view.
anytime, Eileen. And of course, I'll tell you a little story when I get to speak.
Okay.
Okay.
Joy E. Pollock. What does E stand for, Joy?
Eileen.
Eileen.
Okay. Esquire of Meadowbrook, Pennsylvania, is a member of the National Election Committee and a member of the Honorary Council. I'm skipping some of what you said, Joy. She is a past president of the Philadelphia chapter of Hadassah, an independent big chapter. For the chapter, she served as chair of Leadership Development, Foreman Sports Day, and was coordinator of the organization department, donor department, education department, and young leaders. In addition, Joy was chapter vice president, chapter secretary, and president of the Henrietta Zoll Group. She held numerous executive offices in the group at the group level. In her community, Joy served as a board member of Adath Jeshurun Synagogue on two numerous committees while co-chairing the Religious School Committee for 3 years. Joy for 2 years chaired the Philadelphia Women's Division State of Israel Bonds and was co-chair of its Evening of Honor and was its 2002 honoree at its founders event. She is a vice president of the Alumni Association of the Philadelphia High School for Girls. I'm sure there are others that went to the school, not me. After having served as president and vice president and serves as a member of the board of the Rydell Meadowbrook Civic Association. She is a native Philadelphia and she graduated summa cum laude from Albright College, where I started, but I transferred with a BA and has a JD from the University of Pennsylvania Law School. She worked for the Department of Housing and Urban Development and as an associate with the Philadelphia-based law firm of Astor, Weiss, and Newman. A life member, Joy and her late husband, Jay, have 2 children, Jeffrey and Jessica. Let's see, Jeffrey is married to Deb Brown and Jessica is married to Doug Simon. And Joy has 3 grandchildren, Eden, four grandchildren, Eden, Jesse, Jordan, and Cooper. The entire family is life members and associates. Today, Joy lives with Bert Sigel, past executive director of the Philadelphia JCRC, who boasts 3 children and 3 granddaughters. Now, are these people all members of Hadassah, Joy? The 3 children and the granddaughters?
No, they are not.
Oh, they got to become members. Okay, Joy, it's your turn.
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me. It's great to be with my adopted sisters in Hadassah. We haven't seen each other for a while other than on the Zoom, as we all know. However, there's a person who joined us, Charlotte Denenberg, who Charlotte and I spent about 5 or 6 summers together at Camp Rita. and we haven't seen each other since camp in 1960. So this has been a real treat. And Charlotte and I intend to catch up and get together. So look what Hadassah has done. All the good things it does, and also bring people together. What I'm about to tell you is hopefully a lot of new information about the founding of Hadassah and its start. And this is found, I found reading this book called Balm in Gilead, The Story of Hadassah, by Marlon Levin, as the place to go for the historical portion of how Hadassah became what it is today. The book is out of print. I gave a talk like this for my own group, Henrietta's Old, and at the time, one of the co-presidents found this edition, this book, on one of the websites, and I'm not sure whether she found it on eBay, which may be, because it is out of print. And it is, I think it goes back to the 60s when it was printed. And the author is someone who was a newspaper reporter and lived in Jerusalem for his adult life. And his sister was a very active member at Hadassah in Philadelphia. Now, we all know about the study group. Everybody talks about the study group that started Hadassah. But the actual study group started in 1897 and started by a woman by the name of Emma Gattiel. And she named the group Hadassah after her mother. So this was way before the meeting in 1912, when Henrietta's Old and the group decided to name the group Hadassah because it was Purim. Henrietta's Old was not an original member of this study group, but was asked to join it by Judah Magnus, a great rabbi, very well known in New York. He was the rabbi at Temple Emmanuel of New York. Again, a very well-known old synagogue that's still in existence today. And this group met at the Y. And why did Hadassah begin? Well, the backstory is Henrietta's Old, who was quite an educated woman for her day. She actually had been what was called the secretary of the Jewish Publication Society here in Philadelphia. She was born in Baltimore. Her father was a rabbi who had been brought over from Hungary, because most of the rabbis in the late 1800s, early 1900s were brought over from somewhere in Europe, either Germany or another spot, because we were just getting started here in America with rabbinical schools. So they had to get rabbis from Europe. Her parents had 5 daughters, no sons. So of course, her father decided that his girls needed to be educated. And of course, they were very well Jewishly educated, as well as educated both in German and in English, because he spoke German in the house and gave his sermons in German. So she was quite a linguist and able to translate the scholarly works that were written in German for the Jews of America who needed it translated into English. And that's how she became the secretary, because of course no woman was allowed to be called executive secretary or publisher in the days of Henrietta Zold. In the early 1900s, 1908, 1909, her father died. Her mother came to live with her, and they decided to move to New York. And she, Henrietta, wanted to go to the newly found school for rabbis, we would say today, for the conservative rabbis, the seminary. They would only let her take courses. They would not let her matriculate because, of course, there were no female rabbis in those days. So she took courses, and in one of the courses, and again, she had many teachers who came from Germany, and one of them was a teacher who wanted his scholarly works translated, and he and Henrietta had began a working relationship, shall we say, and she translated his books. Henrietta had never been married, and she fell madly in love with the professor. She was older than he was, probably at the time in her late 30s, early 40s. And of course, she was looked at as an old maid because, of course, nobody looked at her as having an ability to have children. Of course, we know very differently today, but that's how they looked at her. And this gentleman looked at her this way. And one summer, 1908, 1909, he went back to Germany and brought himself back a wife. She was heartbroken. And her mother said to her, "We have to get away. Let's go to Palestine with, some European stops." They went to Palestine and they saw the conditions of the Jewish community, which was awful. There was no health care. Unfortunately, they saw children sitting on the streets with flies flying around their eyes because the children had trachoma. They had terrible nutrition. They were heartsick. When they returned home, Henrietta kept talking about this to her mother, and her mother finally said to her, "It's time for you not to talk, but to do something about it." And that's when she thought about the study group, and she went to the study group, and they decided to invite, because they were a very small group of women, there were about 5 or 6 women at the time. They decided to invite all of their friends to come to a meeting on February the 14th, 1912. And they decided at that meeting to form a national organization, which was Hadassah, and that they would try to organize in other places in the country, Jewish women who had an interest in the people of of who lived in the time lived in what was called Palestine. A year later, they had raised enough money to pay to affiliate with the Federation of American Zionists, later known as the Zionist Organization of America. In June of 1914, this group, now called the Daughters of Zion, held their first national convention in Rochester. They adopted Hadassah as their name. Now, going back to 1913, Nathan Strauss, who was one of the founders of Abraham Strauss and Company, and actually Macy's, offered to give them enough money to have a nurse travel to Palestine, and he would pay 4 months worth of the salary of this nurse. But the but in this was Hadassah had to raise $2,500 to match what he was doing and hopefully keep the nurse there longer than the 4 months. Hadassah went and did that, as small as it was, and they now had enough money. Now, can you imagine this? $2,500 plus what Nathan Strauss was giving them. They were able to send 2 nurses to Palestine for a 2-year period. And they did that. And of course, everybody knows our original nurses were Rachel Landy and Rose Kaplan. And they went to Palestine and landed in March of 1913. Now recall that the First World War started in 1914. So now we have 2 nurses who depended upon supplies from the United States because there was nothing in Palestine. And we had to send the supplies on ships that were willing to go through the Mediterranean from the United States during wartime. So it was extremely dangerous, and eventually Hadassah was unable to do that. Originally, the first nurse had to leave because she became quite ill. I believe she had cancer. The second nurse stayed, but was recalled when we couldn't get supplies to her. Now, what had they actually done? They started with working with the children on the trachoma issue, because we did not have trachoma here in the United States. We had eye drops that got rid of the trachoma, as well as some nutrition with infants and young children. Those were the things that they did, as well as some education. There was nothing in Palestine until 1918, when the war was over. And what had happened was the Zionist movement decided that they needed to send a whole delegation of healthcare individuals to Palestine to provide total health care to the Jewish residents of Palestine. And so they got together a group that included a large 18-member delegation. Hadassah was going to be in charge not of gathering the people, but of managing the delegation, and certainly managing it when it got to Israel. And Hadassah was asked to provide $25,000 for the budget of this group, which was $265,000. Now think about that. Today, that would be in the millions, but still an unbelievably small amount when you talk about 18 professionals going to start, in a sense, like a hospital. Now, this group stopped in Europe, and when it stopped there, it met with the Rothschilds, of course, some of the wealthiest Jews that we know. And the Rothschilds agreed to give Hadassah their hospital in Jerusalem. Now, if any of you have gone to the college that Hadassah started in Jerusalem, the Hadassah College, when you enter through gates that say Hadassah Hospital. And that was the original hospital given to Hadassah by the Rothschild family. And the Rothschilds also agreed to help fund the hospital and the employees over a certain amount of years. And they finally reached Palestine in August. This unit was very interesting because not only were doctors sent and nurses, but a dietitian to work with the people to change their eating habits. Now remember, much of the people who had come to Palestine, the Jews, came from Eastern Europe. So they had a certain diet, shall we say, but their diet didn't exactly fit living in the heat of Palestine. They would get up and in the morning they would eat salted fish. Well, of course, the people coming from America, we would normally eat some kind of cereal. So she had to try to convince them to eat oatmeal. Now, think about it, going from salted fish and the look of fish going to oatmeal, which kind of looks like mush. So what she did was she figured out a way that they did not have to carry rice from the rice paddies to a spot where it could be washed with water. She figured out this whole, she and the engineer who was sent also figured out this whole system of how to wash the rice without carrying it long distances. And because of that, they agreed that they would taste the oatmeal. And after they tasted it, they figured out that it wasn't as bad as it looked. And they adopted that as a good hearty breakfast a warm, hearty breakfast before they went out into the fields and had to fight the sun and mosquitoes of Palestine. So that was one of the really good things. After the unit got started, one of the very first things they did, as you know, was set up the School of Nursing and started to educate local women to be nurses, something that was very much needed. They also started a program called Tipat Chalev, which was bringing pasteurized milk to children. This is something that the children in Palestine had not had before. And of course, it was nutritious and better for them than milk just out of the cow. And so as Hadassah grew, and how they grew is place clinics and small hospitals around the country. Now, as you know, today we don't see any of those because eventually Hadassah gave all of those to local institutions. So we do not have hospitals around the country. We have our 2 hospitals, and I will tell you how the first one started. There was a decision that there would be a university in Jerusalem, and the university, Hebrew University, decided to build on Mount Scopus. Even in those days, it was not territory where Jews had gathered. But for some reason, the trustees who ran the university decided to choose that area for Hebrew University. And if you've again been to Jerusalem, you know that Hebrew University still sits in that area on Mount Scopus. Well, since Hadassah was in need of doctors, trained doctors, they knew that they couldn't keep bringing people from the United States or from other places. They had to start educating indigenous people to take over these positions. They decided that they would have an agreement with Hebrew University that they would work together with a medical degree program. And you know that the European style, which was accepted in Israel rather than the American style, was that if you wanted to be a doctor, you immediately went to a school of medicine. You do, even today, you do not go for an undergraduate degree in whatever field you choose and then decide to go on to medical school. No, you went right to medical school. So Hadassah would provide the education within the hospital, and Hebrew University would provide the book learning of it. So when Hadassah went to decide where to put its building, they had this whole issue of, should we build in an area that's not very Jewish, but close to the university, who is our partner, or do we build someplace where it's more Jewish, but not so close? And they made the decision to build on Mount Scopus. And in 1932, now think about this, ladies. Number one, 1932 was the beginning of our horrendous depression, as well as the fact that there was never a guarantee, because in 1918, the British had said by mandate that they were going to give up their, so to speak, rule of Palestine, and at least part of it would become a Jewish state. It was now 1932, 14 years later, and nothing had been done. There had been no movement to make a Jewish state. Hadassah still decided to build this building at Mount Scopus that would be a hospital for, all of the population in Jerusalem, even though we were going through a horrendous depression and there was no guarantee that there would be a Jewish state. But this was being done because the Jewish population was increasing, and the feeling that this was what was needed. By this time, of course, Henrietta Zold was basically living in Israel and was part of the Jewish government, because there was like a Jewish government and an Arab government. The Jewish government was basically for the Jewish community. It was not necessarily elected the way we elect our people today, but Henrietta Zold was basically what you and I would call education and social services chairwoman. In 1936, the hospital was completed. So it took 4 years to build. It was designed by one of the great architects of the day, Eric Mendelsohn. If you've been to Mount Scopus and you've seen the hospital, and I know Margie is very much involved with certain portions of the hospital, it's looks like a hospital building. It's not, to me, it never impressed me as this gorgeous structure, but the inside has some very beautiful parts to it. So we'll go a little bit more into the history of that. But I wanted you to know that it was in use as of 1936, which of course becomes very important because when the Second World War comes along, of course, the hospital was very much in use. Hadassah worked with JNF. Wasn't called JNF at the time. It has its Hebrew name, Karen Kayemet Hami. And Hadassah over the years has generally been the largest single contributor to JNF. And it was interesting. There was a story that a playground was needed, and JNF came to Hadassah and asked if Hadassah would be willing to build this playground. And Hadassah said yes, even though it was a $100,000 donation, but anybody who came to the playground had to see the doctor. There was a doctor who sat there because people were not used to going to the doctor, being checked, making sure that things, especially with the children, were up to date as necessary. So they couldn't get into the playground without seeing the doctor. So that was a cute way, in a sense, of getting two things done at one time. Hadassah became involved in a school lunch program and started that. They didn't start it, but they took it over to feed the children that were going to school. It had been discovered that a yeshiva that had girls, only girls, the girls were starving. And the Hadassah started a lunch for those students, and that became a more widely used program. In 1932 was the first group of young boys to be sent from Europe to be kept in Palestine. It was the start of the Youth Aliyah program. And what had actually happened was a woman by the name of Recha Fryer called on Henrietta Zold to tell her what she viewed as happening in Germany. Recha Fryer was the wife, was a Rebbitzin. Her husband was a rabbi in Germany. And she told Henrietta Zold that she felt that if they didn't get the children, at least the children, out of Germany, that they would eventually perish. Now, this is in 1932, before Kristallnacht, but she was looking at some of the laws that were being promulgated, as well as, of course, the rise of Hitler. Henrietta Zold said to her, you know, you're looking at people who are coming from a highly cultured background. You know, these are kids who go to school, who intend to go on to college, you know, have an education. They don't know anything about farming. And Palestine, basically, the Jewish settlers were farmers. And she said, and many of them don't keep kosher. And she said, you know, these are your children are coming from kosher homes, but cultured and educated. She didn't think it would work. And Recha Fryer kept pushing. And this was the first group of boys who came from Germany to Israel in 1932. Eventually, Henrietta Zold decided that this was true. This was a program that was needed because the Jews of Europe had to be saved in some way. And she would meet every transport that came with the children and was considered to be the mother to these children, never having had children of her own. And the program became known as Youth Aliyah. And for a number of years, Hadassah was the sole support of this program. Originally, the kids were dispersed to various kibbutzim. And then, of course, Hadassah had schools and residences built in specific places. Today, the government has taken over most of the programming of these youth villages. The kids who attend them are kids from the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, some from France and South America, some from Ethiopia, and of course, children who are, in a sense, the underbelly of the population of Israel. Many of them descendants from Jews who have come from Arab lands. And they have a need for a different environment. And of course, we boast how many of these children have become successful, get into the Army. It's not an automatic that you get into the Army. You have to pass certain tests. So today, as we know, we still support 2 villages. One village, Mayor Shafaya, was actually a village that for many years was supported by what was called Junior Hadassah, which was for women under a certain age. And the other village is the village on the Mediterranean. It happens to be in a gorgeous spot where the land, I believe, had been donated again by the Rothschild family. For this, Hadassah has raised much money. And again, during the time that you and I would say, how did they do it? Hadassah has raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for this program, millions if we put it all together. And it's been a really wonderful program for Hadassah, but unfortunately, with Mount Scopus and then the building of the hospital at Ein Kerem, it's a lot to try to have that kind of fundraising for what many people will never see in their lifetime, unfortunately. Now, the hospital at Mount Scopus, as I said, was in 1936 completed and ran until 1948. In April of 1948, a Hadassah convoy, because that's what they needed to do to get the staff from Jerusalem, the Jewish parts of Jerusalem, up to Mount Scopus. They would put people, the staff, in ambulances and bulletproof cars if they had them, and go in a group up to Mount Scopus and then bring the staff down back to their homes. It was very dangerous because the road went through Arab villages, and in one spot on this day, the convoy was attacked. The British soldiers who still were in charge, the mandate of the Jewish state didn't take place until May. The convoy was totally decimated. What happened was most of our staff were burned to death because they were in these vehicles, and incendiary devices were thrown into the vehicles, and the staff couldn't escape because then they were shot and killed. So we lost our director general and decided that we had to abandon Mount Scopus, which we did. And for about 4 or 5 years, we had various small hospitals, smaller buildings scattered in Jerusalem. That was the hospital. And finally, there was a decision that we needed to build a new hospital. And what was chosen was Ein Kerem, which at the time was like a suburb. But Ben Gurion promised that the vision was that Jerusalem would eventually make it out to Ein Kerem. And he was right. It has definitely moved out to Ein Kerem. And in 1961-62, we dedicated the hospital at Ein Kerem. In 1968, during the Six-Day War, from the whole period from the 48 abandonment till the 68 war, a convoy of Jewish soldiers would patrol Mount Scopus, and that was agreed upon in the armistice agreement, you know, the not peace agreement, but the agreement that ended the open hostilities, that a group of soldiers would take care of Mount Scopus only. Those soldiers actually took part eventually in the 1968 Day War, had, so to speak, protected the hospital, though the hospital had been ransacked and basically even the copper piping was gone, had to be totally rebuilt. And in 1968, when the Israelis took that part of Jerusalem, the decision was made by Hadassah to rebuild Mount Scopus, even though we had this brand new building on Ein Kerem. So today we run these two hospitals, which total about 1,100 beds. They are as modern as can be, even though the outside building may not be brand new. We just built a brand new building on Ein Kerem and are renovating the older building at Ein Kerem. And of course, the hospital on Mount Scopus had basically been rebuilt from the inside, and some of the portions of the hospital, like its rehabilitation center, are being rebuilt. So we today run the two hospitals. Hadassah still has an interest in Youth Aliyah. We still participate in programs with the JNF. And Hadassah today looks at a very glorious history within the community of Israel. We started their first vocational schools, one for girls, one for boys. Those schools were then given to the municipality of Jerusalem, and we started a junior college, which became our Hadassah College. Hadassah College is now on its own, though receives support from some Hadassah donors. And then, of course, the Youth Aliyah program, which, as I said, we still have 2 villages which we support and some special programming that we support. And we had for many years Young Judea, which was a program here in the United States as a youth group movement. And it encouraged the learning about Israel, the history of Palestine and Israel, and of course encouraged young people to take trips to Israel. And for many of them, it meant making Aliyah to Israel. So that is our history. That's where we are today. And I'm open to take any questions you may have. And certainly thank you for your interest and your attention. And I certainly thank all of you for everything that you do to continue this long and glorious history.
I just realized I said everything and I was muted. Okay, I'm not muted. So I was thanking you so much because, as Donna said, you are such a wealth of information. And that was just fascinating. She also would like to know if you can talk a little about the Chagall Chapel.
Okay, this is a very fascinating story. One of the presidents of Hadassah was a woman by the name of I know her last names because one of her names was Freud, but it was she was as many of the Hadassah presidents have been, an outstanding, brilliant woman, well known within the Jewish community, extremely well respected. And she decided when we were going to build the hospital at Ein Kerem that the chapel really needed something special, different. And she decided, and this is again in the 50s, that she was going to go to Paris to speak to Chagall to see if he would design some stained glass windows for the Hadassah Chapel, the synagogue. And she went to Paris and convinced him to design these magnificent 12 windows of the 12 tribes, representing each window representing a tribe, the tribes of Israel. And if you've ever been to Hadassah and seen these windows, they are breathtaking. I'm not sure everybody loves them because, of course, they're in the vein of Chagall, very modernistic and much more, shall we say, it's not a picture. It's almost a movement and a feeling and what you get from them. But they are quite gorgeous. And he himself came to Israel to install them with some of his own laborers, who, of course, this was the kind of work that they did, and it's quite spectacular. When the Six-Day War began, his chief workmen came to Israel and took the windows down piece by piece so that they would not be destroyed. And Chagall promised that if anything happened to any window, he would replace them. It was not an issue that, luckily the hospital was never touched in that war. So, we've been very fortunate because obviously those windows are probably something that you and I couldn't even divine what they're worth, if anybody could even put a price tag on them. Since they are all originals, all done by his hand and under his supervision. So therefore, they're 12 works of his artwork, as if we owned 12 paintings of his, but they're quite larger than most paintings that he painted, and quite fabulous in their coloration and in their thematics. So I am sure that they are definitely priceless. And it was, not on a whim, because it was not her whim. I mean, she really thought this out and really made some presentation to him and really pushed at him till he finally agreed to do it.
Thank you. They are beautiful. For those of you who have been in my house, I have a poster of all of them that I stare at often. Beautiful. We have another question. Are the Levi Strauss family still involved with Hadassah Hospital?
It's not Levi. Levi is Levi's. This is the family that founded Macy's and Abraham Strauss. And it was two brothers. And his one brother died on the Titanic. And that was an interesting story, because both brothers had decided to go on a trip to Europe and Palestine. And on their way back, the one brother did not get on to the Titanic. He was supposed to be on the Titanic, but for some reason missed getting on the ship. And of course, you can imagine how he felt when the ship went down and his brother went down with the ship. I think his sister-in-law survived. I am not sure, but I think she survived. But his brother died.
I believe that actually died also. That was like a big part of the movie. The elderly couple that he wouldn't get on, she would not get on because he would not get on. And then at the end, they showed them very dramatically in their bed with the water rushing in.
Elaine has a question.
I have a question.
Yes.
Elaine Levy. I read it's Hadassah was working with JNF on this hospital or some sort of medical company in southern Italy, southern Israel. I don't know the name of it. I did make a contribution to it, but it's Hadassah with JNF. Now, can anybody tell me more about it? I forgot the name of the person that's working with Hadassah.
I don't know anything about it, but I'm surprised because I didn't think building hospitals was JNF's mission.
This is a combination of the two of them, Hadassah and JNF.
Yeah, but Hadassah hasn't built any hospitals since.
Maybe it was a medical center.
They haven't
No.
built that kind of stuff since the 30s, other than the two hospitals that we own.
Thank you.
They did in the, 20s and 30s had clinics and hospital, small hospitals throughout the country, but they haven't had those since probably the early 60s.
Thank you.
But I, if I come across it, I'll get you an answer.
Thank you, Joy. Andy has her hand up.
Who's presenting?
Hi. I know I did say thank you in the chat, but Joy, thank you so much for the presentation. I was just curious. I know Margie introduced you and said different things, and of course, all three of us have an Albright connection. Margie being my little sister and roommate, and Joy and me being in an alumni honorary sorority together. My question is, did your family, or how did you really get involved? I know you've mentioned, you've introduced, but how did you yourself become so involved in Hadassah?
Well, and that's an interesting question, because I think it's very telling, Andy, about organizations and why you join, and et cetera, et cetera. And we talk about this all the time because both of us being very involved in charities. My mother was extraordinarily, my parents helped build a synagogue in Mount Airy, which today, of course, is a Black church. And my father was very active, and my mother was very active in the sisterhood, and eventually on the region level was very active. And when I got married, I was in law school, and when I got out of law school, I worked. And eventually, when I became pregnant, which, as people were wont to say, I was an old lady. At the time now, I was pretty young at 26, but for my generation, I was a real old lady. No, I'm sorry, I was 28. And so I thought to myself, I'm going to need some kind of be able to do some charitable work. And of course, the first thing I did was look at the synagogue that we belonged to, and we belonged to Adath Jeshurun. And I went to a sisterhood luncheon. And I tell you, not one person said hello to me. Not one. And I thought to myself, I'm not sure that this is where I belong. So a friend of mine said to me, oh, I belong to this Hadassah, at the time, group, not chapter. Why don't you come with me? We're having a new members tea, and, we'd like you to, check us out, see what it's like. Well, it was such a different atmosphere than when I had been at the synagogue. So I joined, and they immediately gave me a wonderful job. I was editor of the newspaper, but in those days we used a mimeograph machine. Do you remember those, guys? And I had to teach myself how to use a mimeograph machine. I'd never taken typing in school. So here I was hunting and pecking as people gave me articles. But it was a good, it's always good to learn new skills. So I looked at it as an education. And that was my start in Hadassah. And I didn't become active at the synagogue, Andy, until my kids went. And we became very close with some of the people that my kids became close with in Hebrew school. So that eventually I ran the gift shop at Adith Jeshrin with, at the time, our best friends. And but I never became, and that was a responsibility of the sisterhood, but I never became active in the sisterhood, never. I was active, as you hear in my bio, on the synagogue level, but never in the sisterhood.
Thank you. The thing I love most about the Mimeo machine, and from all my beginning years of teaching, but I also did the newsletter for Shir Tamid when we began Shir Tamid, not Shir, Shalom Tamid. You can't make a mistake.
That
Like,
is correct.
oh my God, kids today would no way be able to do that. You cannot make a mistake. Anyway, there are people who are leaving. They're all saying they love the program. I saw somebody's hand up. Sue?
One of the things I wanted to share, and Joy, you could probably appreciate this, is one of the many times that we were in Israel, we were at the hospital and we were in the chapel and they were under threat. So they told us that it was a very safe place to be. Immediately, they put the sandbags up, the window protectors came down, and they let us stay there because they said with all that protection, we were safe. It was scary, but we were safe. And we were there for hours until they felt it was safe to remove the sandbags and remove the coverings of the windows.
Wow, quite an experience. I assume you had bathrooms.
They didn't let us out of the room.
Oy. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, well, let's just mention book club before we go, which is next Tuesday. The book is The Vanishing Half. Either of my book club people, who I have one left, I think.
It's a great book.
Okay.
Agreed.
Fran, you're now muted. Fran, you're still muted. Unmute.
Am I unmuted now?
Yep.
Okay. It's The Vanishing Half. Diana and Bonnie are going to be chairing the meeting,
Okay.
and looking forward to it.
On the book list all year, it said Bonnie Zuckerman. It's Bonnie Cohen.
Bonnie Cohen, yeah. I just think of Bonnie.
I know, I just want to make that
Thank
clear.
you. Thank
We
you.
have gotten together, we did our first set of questions. We're now on our edits. We will get it to, I guess, Eileen, Fran, and Denise, probably by the end of the week. And then you can send it all out. It is a very interesting book. And those of us who had the need, of course, to read it twice because we read it so long ago, you get so much more out the second.
Andy?
Just a question, will you send out another, I guess, a Zoom link for the book club for next week? I agree, the book was great.
Fran? Fran will send you a link.
Do I
Great.
have
Thank
your
you.
email?
I told Eileen, so Eileen, did you?
I can absolutely send you Fran's email, and if I should forget, you will all remind me.
Yeah, I think I got it actually from
Everything.
Diana. I think you sent me something on the list. Thank you.
Absolutely.
It is a great book.
Anybody else? Well, then, love to all of you. Have a great week. And I hope to
Next
see you
Tuesday.
next Tuesday.
Thanks, Joy.
And
Thanks,
Joy, thank you
everybody.
so much, Joy. It was wonderful.
Hope to see you soon.
Oh, like
See you soon.
Thank you, Joy. Bye.
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 Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
Everybody stay safe, stay well.
Everybody stay safe.
Absolutely. Bye, all.